potential target?
Well, he could be a target of the Justice Department, but for the congressional committees whose job it is to produce public testimony and a public report on what happened, then no, he's not their target. He is their witness. He's the one who could talk about conversations with Donald Trump about the Russia issue. He's the one that could explain when he was talking to Kislyak, was he acting under instructions from Trump or not? It's hard to see how the committees can answer those questions without key testimony from the guy most centrally involved.
But Joyce, on the immunity question then, I mean, there's different types of immunity, and I don't want to go full law school for a lot of reasons. One reason is I just don't want to relive that. I did it once. It was painful. But on the type of immunity he'd get from Congress, it would be mostly about his testimony. He would still have a Fifth Amendment argument that if there's an open criminal inquiry, he doesn't want to talk at all because he could be the target, right?
I think that's exactly right. And so increasingly here we'll see a little bit of conflict between the Justice Department and the congressional oversight committees. But in reality, what will happen here is that Flynn will have to accept a plea agreement. We're hearing people talk about immunity. I think the much more likely course of events is a plea agreement in which he pleads guilty to some of the readily provable charges, perhaps a failure to provide information on his security forms, and then you'll see him testify in front of the Congress after that plea deal is signed, sealed, and confirmed in court.
So, Joyce, you're suggesting that there could be a basically federal criminal liability, for example, if he is hit with a Foreign Agent Registration Act, and that actually can be a federal crime. And you're saying,
sure,
well, that's not the worst thing in the world. That would be the hook to get more?
And I think that there are actually many other potential federal charges. There's 1001, making a false statement to the government, which could be a false statement on his SF-86, the paperwork all federal employees have to submit. So there are some pretty readily available federal charges here. The Attorney General does have some ability to intervene and to keep congressional immunity from going forward. He has a 20-day period in which he can ask a judge to halt. So that might be enough time for the Justice Department to muster its evidence and put something on the table.
Right, and you're talking about the legal process, and you explain it very well. There's also, Joan, a political and public process here, which is how would the country feel at this stage about anyone wrapped up in this getting immunity? That would strike me as a very explosive way to open an investigation. Take a listen to Adam Schiff on the piling questions piling up around Flynn.
With a very healthy skepticism. We know from the filings that were dumped by the White House on Friday that General Flynn failed to report the money that he received from that RT propaganda arm of the Kremlin, as well as 2 other Russian entities. We also have requested the background security documents that General Flynn filled out to find out whether he similarly failed to disclose work that he was doing as a financial agent of a foreign power. There's a lot we need to learn before entertaining anything like this.
I mean, Joan, the issue there seems to be more than just paperwork. Did you forget? It seems larger, which is, why were you taking money from Putin's propaganda arm?
In the first place, right. Michael is probably right in the long term, but I think right now it just is way too early. They don't know what they need to know from him or about him. We don't know what he's trying to offer. It seems like a way for him and his attorney to get out ahead of it, but it just seems like both committees, Schiff and that they're right to say no.
Joan, hold up. Joan, finish your thought. Michael, after that.
Yeah, I have a somewhat different perspective here, which is I want to know what they're waiting for. Here we are, several months into this at this point. We still haven't seen a single subpoena from the Senate committee, which is going to be, an issue. I mean, are Republicans going to go along with subpoenas? We have no fact witnesses who have been notified for testimony yet, and you know, I don't know what they think they're going to get by methodically going through and getting security clearance forms and other material. I mean, I think the bar here is, you know, there's a great deal of public expectation about wanting to get to the bottom of this. And, you know, if their plan is to take months and months and then down the road get it, I don't see that answering the kind of questions that people
Agreed.
really
And
need.
they have more time than we do in this segment. Final quick word to Joan.
Well, right. Michael's right. I just think you don't start with immunity to Mike Flynn at this point. But yes, why there are no subpoenas, et cetera, those are really good questions.
There are a lot of witnesses.
Right. So we are, and now, as I previewed, we are completely out of time. Joan Walsh, thank you so much. Michael Isikoff, Joyce Vance, thank you all. David Corn stays with me. We're out of time because we have more after the break. Coming up when we get to the Family Feud GOP style. President Trump taking aim at the Freedom Caucus members who crossed him on health care. Trump's social media director getting right into it, threatening primaries for a prominent conservative, the rift, and what does it mean for the Trump agenda? Also, next hour, something special, Growing Up Trump, a new generation speaking out, and we have a panel of young people from both sides of the aisle here to talk about the first 100 days and what young people see as the hope. President Trump began this week blasting conservative Freedom Caucus members, but today, he struck a different note, golfing with conservative Senator Rand Paul, who was one of the loudest critics of Trump's health care bill. You could also feel the love in Trump's tweets today as he declared Obamacare repeal is alive and well, and he's proud of the love and strength of the R party. Trump's mood may have warmed, but his operation's political payback is still alive. A top aide actively calling for a primary against Freedom Caucus member Justin Amash. Now, after this declaration of war, is this a truce? To break it all down, we have Brian Darling, a former aide to Rand Paul and a senior government studies fellow at the Heritage Foundation. You see him there behind Paul in the elevator. Also with us, David Corn, back with us, and we have former Republican representative from Florida, David Jolly. Welcome, everyone. We're going by ranking. So, Congressman Jolly, we start with you, although, as you know, not everyone ranks Congress first, but we will, out of respect.
Very few people do.
Explain to us what we're seeing in a back and forth, good cop, bad cop, but maybe it's like Two-Face from Batman because Trump is the good cop and the bad cop.
Sure. Well, Ari, first of all, thank you for not going full law school on the last segment about Flynn and immunity. Listen, if this is love and strength, I hate to see what hate and weakness looks like from the Trump administration, right? We have a failed health care bill. We have an intelligence chairman who has lied to the speaker, lied to the media. But look, Dan Scavino, who you refer to as the top aide who recently took on Justin Amash, Scavino's an idiot. He's a complete idiot to think that you can take on the Freedom Caucus and actually pass an agenda, because here's what matters. Listen, it's opening day. We all think everything's spring and everything's great right now. Here's what's going to happen in politics in the next 60 days. We are going to face a government shutdown on April 28th, and Donald Trump will either work with Democrats or shut down the government. We're going to then face a debt limit increase, and he will either work with Democrats or he will default on the nation's debt. Right. You thought this week is a bad week between Trump and the House Freedom Caucus? Wait till you see the ideological divide when he works with Democrats on a cromnibus and on a debt limit increase.
Well, and I'll take that right to you, Brian, because when you look at grassroots Republican politics, one of the most positive things you can note is that issues matter, right? And Justin Amash, like your old boss Rand Paul, has really made libertarian issues the bread and butter of his campaign. I'm going to put his response here, give him the benefit of response. He wrote back, Trump admin and establishment have merged into Trump establishment, same old agenda, attack conservatives, libertarians, and independent thinkers. Walk us through what you see as important about that reference to libertarians and independent thinkers.
Yeah, I joked on Twitter this week that some squish in the Trump administration hijacked the Trump Twitter account because it didn't seem to make much political sense attacking the House Freedom Caucus. The House Freedom Caucus could prove to be Trump's biggest ally in many fights in pledging to primary a number of them. I just don't think it makes any political sense at all. I mean, Justin Amash, Thomas Massie, who's not a member of the House Freedom Caucus, but who's very conservative, Jim Jordan of Ohio. You look in the Senate, Rand Paul, who golfed with Trump today. These are all important allies in cutting taxes, getting real tax reform on so many issues that Trump wants to get done. It doesn't make any sense to do this. I understand that this administration will work with Democrats on certain issues, probably on the infrastructure bill, that they're going to need Republicans and hardcore conservatives to get a real tax reform bill across the finish line. And this health care debate's not over. There's still a chance to repeal and replace Obamacare if that bill is changed. So I just think it was not wise to attack so early the House Freedom Caucus and conservatives in general.
Right, and David, Twitter is powerful. It's part of the modern machinery of politics, but it doesn't work for everything. And I don't know if we want to get personal. I remember watching you learn Twitter, right?
Yes, you were my Twitter godfather, Ari.
We were on the Obama's plane in 2008, and David was like, I don't know about this. And I was like, try it. And then he got really good at it, has a ton more followers than most people, so mazel, David. But on the point of what Twitter's good for, I want to put up a Trump tweet that did not appear to work, March 7th. Not that one, but the one on Rand Paul. I feel pretty sure my friend Rand Paul will come along with the new and great health care program because he knows Obamacare is a disaster. Do we have that one, folks? We'll get it. Yep, there it is. That's a this is important because it's a March 7th tweet that is trying to achieve an outcome, not just an insult, but an outcome, and it didn't work, David.
Well, that was one of those brief moments when Trump was trying to think, productively about how to use Twitter and how to be constructive with it. I think at the core here is that there is no core. What does Trump really care about? Does he have any ideas about health care policy? I mean, you have to choose. You're going to go free market all the way and get rid of Obamacare and just let people fend for themselves in a revitalized private system, which I don't think would be a disaster. I know that's what the Freedom Caucus wants. Or are you going to come up with something else? He has no ideas. Even when tax reform, all he's been able to say is it's going to be great, it's going to be wonderful. He himself doesn't have any core principles on a lot of these issues. So when you're dealing with ideologues, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but the Freedom Caucus people are ideologues. Rand Paul is a libertarian ideologue. They stick often to their guns on matters of policy. And Trump really doesn't understand how to deal with that because in some ways it is so foreign to his own nature. And I don't see how on any of these other issues that the former congressman ticked off that Trump's going to be able to have a meeting of the minds with any of these more conservative Republicans when it comes to the issues and philosophies they care about.
Congressman, and then Brian.
Yeah, so look, Jeb Bush famously said you can't insult your way to the presidency. Donald Trump proved him wrong. But I don't think you can insult your way to governing.
Right.
So how does he do this, right? There is no pathway to do this. You can't actually bring together the Freedom Caucus who you just alienated on these critical votes. And so that's what we're going to see play out in the next 60 days. You thought last week was a war? Watch what happens when Ted Cruz and Rand Paul go over and meet with the House Freedom Caucus in the next 60 days and become the ideological leader of the party that the President of the United States claims the mantle for. We're going to see a division, and no governance will happen.
We're going to bring in Brian, but Congressman, I don't know what you're doing post-Congress, but you could be one of those announcers for the movie sequels where you're like, if you thought
in a world
Die Hard was scary. Brian, final thought.
Listen, I've lived through this. This is history repeating itself.
Hopefully this was a learning moment for President Trump that he should not allow the House leadership to draft his legislation because it turned out to be a disaster. Right. The Ryan Care bill was not a repeal and replace bill. It was not something that conservatives liked, and they were very much the president tried to force conservatives and bully them into supporting something. Well, the House Freedom Caucus and conservatives are going to be a great ally when the president pushes conservative legislation. So stop letting the leadership write the legislation for you. Do it yourself.
Right, and that's going to be relevant to so many upcoming issue fights, so it's important. Brian Darling, David Corn, and former Congressman Dave Jolly, thank you all. I appreciate it.
Good to be with you, Ari.
Up next on this week's installment of Normal or Not, I will dig into the unusual fight over the Republican platform in July 2016. We have some new reporting on a delegate I spoke to about who in the Trump campaign was trying to water down tough language on Russia and what it looks like in hindsight.
Any blamings that Russia could have been interfering in domestic affairs of the United States is slander.
Also today, legendary journalist and author Gay Talese joins me live. His thoughts on this unusual political age. nation, that nation's interest in the GOP platform. Russia had two goals in 2016. First, thwart Hillary Clinton in the election. But second, even if Trump didn't win, we're told Russia wanted to use the Trump campaign itself to tilt Republican politics towards Russia. Now, the first goal gets the most attention. We hear a lot about the election. The second one is critical, though, because it shows how the influence campaign may have worked before Election Day. And that brings us to this obscure campaign entity, the GOP Platform Committee. Now, party activists often use it to rubber stamp the core positions held by the party. But in 2016, there was a fight over a plank in the platform that seemed strange at the time and even stranger today. At this month's historic hearing with FBI Director Comey, Congressman Adam Schiff referred to this incident. And keep in mind, he is privy to top secret intel, so he's not likely to make claims without evidence.
Ambassador Kislyak, who presides over a Russian embassy in which diplomatic personnel would later be expelled as likely spies, also attends the Republican Party convention and meets with Carter Page and additional Trump advisors J.D. Gordon and Walid Phares.
Schiff describing their Russian officials at the convention and noting how those same Trump aides oversaw the platform.
Just prior to the convention, the Republican Party platform is changed, removing a section that supports the provision of lethal defensive weapons to Ukraine, an action that would be contrary to Russian interests. Manafort categorically denies involvement by the Trump campaign in altering the platform. But the Republican Party delegate who offered the language in support of providing defensive weapons to Ukraine states that it was removed at the insistence of the Trump campaign.
That delegate Schiff was referring to, a former Reagan appointee, is named Diana Denman. She had proposed the basic language that the U.S. should provide lethal defensive weapons to Ukraine in its fight against Russia. But she says Trump officials intervened to kill that policy. And they had denied that for months, until March, when Republican operative J.D. Gordon confirmed to CNN that he advocated for the successful platform language that the Ukrainians not be armed in their battle against pro-Russian separatists. Denman says Gordon not only killed the amendment, but did so while having an animated phone call with what he described as the highest levels of the Trump campaign in New York. She would not specify if that meant Donald Trump herself. Was that normal? Reporter Allegra Kirkland probed whether this happened for, say, policies regarding any other country on earth. Asked if she recalled Trump staffers intervening to table any other amendment put before the National Security Committee, Denman said that's the only one. So the only topic the Trump campaign intervened on was about Russia. And the change they wanted was to go soft on Russia, so the platform, up to today, it now offers only, quote, appropriate assistance to the armed forces of Ukraine, not military aid against Russia. And the Trump campaign officials demanding that change say they were acting on the direct authority of some of the highest levels of the campaign. Now, I called Diana Denman and asked her about how high this went. She said at the time J.D. Gordon was citing such a high-level authority on the campaign, she didn't really believe him. Here's what she told me. I thought he was perhaps overreaching his pay grade, so I asked him 3 times. I asked him very definitely who he was talking to, and he gave me the same answer all 3 times. I really didn't believe him. But given what she knows now, Denman told me she does now believe what he said then, that he was speaking about watering down this Russia amendment to someone in the highest levels of the campaign. I should tell you, we did invite her on the show today, but given these open inquiries, she's currently declining TV interviews. Investigators may want to know a lot more about this. Who was on that line in New York? Why did they care so much about softening military threats against Russia? And had Russian officials formally requested this change from Trump aides? And did they ask for anything in return? To be clear, we don't have all the answers, but the fact that these questions are swirling around a change to the platform to benefit a foreign country at the center of what is now a criminal inquiry into its possible collusion with the Trump campaign overseeing the platform? No, that is not normal. Now, straight ahead, putting a price on your privacy, a vote in Congress that Who gets to know where you've traveled on the internet? And the group that's looking for payback against members who backed it. Plus, next hour, our special panel, Growing Up Trump. Russia was a big story this week, but not the only story. We want to share 3 other important developments you might have missed. First, the Senate authorized states to block federal funds from abortion providers with an unusual tie-breaking vote right there by Mike Pence. Democrats criticizing the measure as an unnecessary attack on women's constitutional rights. Second, Trump's aggressive rhetoric may actually finally be getting him in trouble in court. You may know this, political speech is widely protected, but a judge just ruled that some of Trump's campaign rhetoric was actually so violent it should be tested in court as potential incitement, which of course is not protected. Quote, speech that falls within the category of incitement, not entitled to First Amendment protection, the judge referring to speech like this.
If you see somebody getting ready to throw a tomato, knock the crap out of them, would you? Seriously. I'd like to punch him in the face, I'll tell you. Try not to hurt him. If you do, I'll defend you in court. Don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it. And number 3, the Republican agenda that Congress is pursuing without promoting or tweeting much about it, maybe because it's not very popular. This week, Congress gutting internet privacy protections, which makes it easier for companies like AT&T, Verizon, and Comcast, which is the parent company of NBC Universal, to collect and sell your browser history. The Obama-era protections here basically frozen, and some privacy activists now agitating to give members of Congress a taste of their own medicine, threatening to buy and release their private web histories, which we should note is probably illegal the way they're threatening it. Others using transparency to argue Republicans sold out, and they want to use the web to expose why, arguing it's all about the campaign money. The bill now on the president's desk, John Spicer saying he doesn't know when President Trump will sign it. Privacy, abortion, and Trump's violent rhetoric, a lot for our political panel to break down. Maya Wiley is here, former counsel to New York Mayor de Blasio, and a Fordham political science professor, Christina Greer. Welcome to you both.
Yeah.
On the law, Maya, what do you make of the internet privacy?
Internet privacy just took a big hit as a result of rolling back the FCC's regulations under Chairman Wheeler. This is really, you made the point, Ari, and it's really important. It is not popular.
No.
There was actually a survey done by University of Pennsylvania that found that it essentially, you literally had 70% of folks thinking that you shouldn't be able to follow people who use your internet in a store to determine what they're doing with that internet. So this is something that was disturbing in terms of how quickly it happened, and no matter what the FCC says, we shouldn't expect many protections.
Yeah, I mean, Christina, I don't want to be too simplistic about it, but, you know, they talk about Congress doing public policy. This feels more like private sector policy. You can understand why corporations want to maximize profit. You can even say under our laws they have a duty sometimes to do that, but that's within the law. Why make it easier? And on the point I wanted to get to on the what we call the clapback, here's Misha Collins from Supernatural online. She's started the GoFundMe campaign saying, thanks, Congress, for voting to put all our private data up for sale. We can't wait to buy yours.
So I think there are 2 things that we need to remember with this particular administration, this particular president in particular, is 1, anytime that Donald Trump can make money or try to make money for either his friends, his cronies, or his family, we know that those policies will most likely disproportionately affect a very small number of Americans who will profit from this. So that's what we need to keep our eye on. And number 2, I think this is part of a larger issue of really trying to roll back an entire Obama agenda and an Obama legacy. Obama did lots on climate change. He tried to work with the FCC to make sure that there were some privacy protections, to make sure that net neutrality made at least the internet somewhat more equitable, so we don't have a 2-tier system with poor people getting slower service and wealthier people being able to pay for essentially high-speed highways for their internet access. This is the Trump administration's real agenda to make sure that the Obama progressive policies are just deleted in many ways. And even though he signed this bill that wouldn't take effect until later on this year, this is still sort of preempting to make sure that he doesn't have a legacy when it comes to the internet, which is really problematic, especially for poor people, but for regular Americans. And if if I were a Republican congressman or a Republican voter? I mean, we know that the party of family values likes to do some things in the dark that they probably don't want in the light.
Well,
so I would assume that they would support some sort of privacy effort.
Whether that's supported by evidence or not, because I'm sure plenty of people would say that they could proudly share their browser history. The point being made online, Maya, is the hypocrisy of, are you really ready to do that? Why are you making it so easy? I do want to get you in, though, on the laws of incitement, because there is a long tradition of giving a wide berth to political speech. Indeed, as you well know, there are Supreme Court cases that defend anti-war protesters and civil rights protesters for going over the line, for saying really aggressive things. This case has, as we showed in the lead, uphill battle, but what do you think of its legal chances, and what do you think of its import?
Well, legally, I think the judge did the right thing, because remember, this was on a motion to dismiss. So essentially, the judge was saying this should go forward into a process of gathering discovery so that there can be a determination whether or not this meets the high standard. I think there's no question, in the clips you showed, Ari, make it clear that this is also, the judge made the point that we knew that white supremacists were actually in the audience. The fact that Trump and the Trump campaign was aware, should have been aware of that, is a suggestion that they actually would have known that there might be some violence that occurs because of the speech
That it was foreseeable.
That it was foreseeable, and that's actually, and a proximate cause. So those are all elements that are going to be important in the case moving forward.
It's getting real legal up in here.
It's getting real legal.
A lot of jargon.
But I mean, the bottom line is, if you tell somebody to beat somebody up and you have reason to believe that they might actually do it, then you might be liable.
Final point, because again, we like hitting on things that didn't get as much attention. This was a significant vote. That's President Trump is insulting the press again this weekend, singling out my own colleague, Chuck Todd, calling him sleepy eyes. Todd brushed off the taunt, noting he slept well after watching Mississippi State beat UConn. And while that exchange is basically routine in the Trump Twitter era, it would have been extraordinary during most other presidencies, where government tension with the press was intense but more substantive, the focus on war and peace, not burns and retweets. Our next guest was at the center of the press's shifting role in American politics and culture. Gay Talese got his start as a copy boy and a sports reporter at the New York Times. He hustled his way into covering more serious stories, sending him to places like Selma during the 1965 protests, where Talese reported what he saw to a national audience, like marchers facing down the threat of violence. Quote, "There were young blondes in polo coats and hipsters with beards. There were white faces and black faces, ministers' collars and turtleneck sweaters. They differed in age and religion, but shared a unity of purpose. They'd come to march through the streets of Selma." He wrote, "A young man with a short blonde beard yelled at Dr. King, 'You son of a bitch, you want to vote? Why don't you act like a human being?' Dr. King said nothing. What tomorrow? Nobody knew." End quote. Reflecting later on that reporting, Talese says he was dissatisfied with much of his writing, noting, "I wish I could think of better words to describe what I had seen, even though, in a fully understood and enduring sense, I was not really sure what I had seen, beyond the sadism and suffering along the highway." But Talese felt that his independence from elites was an advantage.
When I was a young journalist, we were of the underclass, and we would approach them as we were looking from the outside in to a world of privilege and power and affluence.
Talese bore down on privilege and power. Who had it? Why? Who was trying to take it? He charted how television changed the culture and created new stars, writing, "It was not that television was slanting the news, but that the newsmakers were slanting themselves to television. That shaped who the elites were and the language they spoke." Talese also had a knack for cutting through spin and PR. His iconic Esquire profile, Frank Sinatra Has a Cold, is considered a masterpiece of new journalism because it revealed Sinatra's world through people around him, even though Talese had virtually no access for an interview with the star himself. Talese says the real story isn't always about the so-called big people.
All these little stories are really big stories if you think big about little people. And that's what I like to do. I thought there were so many interesting people. Not important people necessarily, not people who would make news, but people who were part of newsmaking, or at least part of the miracle of daily journalism.
Gay Talese, the miracle of daily journalism, an honor to have you here.
and for me to be here.
You look at this era, what I wanted to do with the benefit of your presence was look at some of the different presidents, because you've seen so much. Take a look at Lyndon Johnson, talking about the press and its role in those heightened times of Vietnam.
We believe very strongly in preserving the right to differ in this country and the right to dissent. And if I have done a good job of anything since I've been president, is to ensure that there are plenty of dissenters. And there's not a person in this press corps that can't write what he wants to write, and most of them do write what they want to write.
What do you see there?
I remember how strong the press, especially the New York Times that I knew best, was against Johnson in his war. David Halberstam, for example, who won the Pulitzer Prize in 1964 at the New York Times covering Vietnam, was loathed within the White House of Johnson as well as his predecessor, John Kennedy. In fact, John Kennedy, in 1962, went to the published New York Times to try to get rid of, or 63, tried to get rid of Halberstam, tried to move him out of Saigon.
Ousted, yeah.
Ousted. And you know, the history of the presidency and the press is one of an adversarial relationship, if not a sense of loathing entirely. I mean, there's not a president that liked the press. Roosevelt hated the New York Times, Franklin Roosevelt. And Truman, you know, what he did with a music critic that didn't like his daughter Margaret's way of singing. I mean, what we have now in the White House of Trump is not to be singled out as a special case of the president feeling he's being persecuted or trying to point his own rancor on the press itself. It's an old story.
An old story. So let me play some of Donald Trump. Some of this from when he was a candidate, personally singling out reporters, even making light or making fun of one's handicap.
A nice reporter. Now the poor guy. You got to see this guy. Oh, I don't know what I said. I don't remember. He's going like, I don't remember. Oh, maybe that's what I said. There's something happening. They're not reporting it. Katie, you're not reporting it, Katie. But there's something happening, Katie.
Does it concern you, or do you see it as really of a piece with the history?
Well, it concerns me, but on the other hand, as a journalist, and I still am at 85, not as lissom as I was at 25, but still active in my own ambition as a journalist. I see this president as representing what we loathe, but also I do believe that his persona, his face, is a face of America that is real, but we just do not want to condone and shouldn't.
Who is we?
Donald Trump is America. It's not the America that we want to elevate or even appreciate, but there is much of him throughout this country. It's not something we wish to extol or appreciate or accept, but it's here. There are many, many Donald Trump faces in this country. He speaks to a constituency that is not the kind of people that you wish to associate with, you, me, anybody, but there really is an anger in this country. And there's a sense of isolation in this country.
You think the political establishment didn't want to believe that the support was out there for him?
I believe that. I believe that, and I believe that the journalists of your generation, as opposed to mine, which goes back 50 years, we were very different in my time as journalists compared to the ones today, because we were much more aware of the low, basic, sometimes despicable character of our country, because many of us came out of a rough and tumble or down and out life. We journalists of the post-World War II period, of which I'm a part, I started in 1953, 54. We were of the underclass. We were of the class that, 2 generations later, will vote for Trump.
You didn't identify exactly the same way that reporters can be so cozy. You talk about your craft. I was reading this. I want to read it to you. You said why you don't like to use a tape recorder in your writing. You said, recording an experience can prevent the insight that comes from deep probing. Mm-hmm. Reporters who use a recorder instead of being in the moment risk generating only a first draft drift of the mind, symptomatic of a society permeated by fast food, computerized, bottom line, and personalized workmanship, reducing the once artful craft of writing to the level of talk radio on paper. I wonder what you think of a world where so many people go to a concert and they try to video record it so they don't actually watch it. They just watch it through the video, and whether we're losing something tactile here.
Yeah, I do think, as a senior citizen of journalism, that we are losing a lot. When I first was a young man of your age, I got a job in the Old Time Reporter. When I first walked in the New York Times, my first day as a rookie reporter, he said, "Young man, stay off the telephone." The telephone in my time, 1950s, was the new technology. He said, you have to show up. You have to see the people's faces. Be there. Yeah. Be there. I don't care. Well, right now, in the grandchildren, comparably, people are looking at their smartphone, and the life is through the laptop, and there isn't that discovery by chance of wonderful characteristics of the story.
Right.
There's so much that's focused on getting it fast, getting it first, not necessarily getting it all, but getting it to a degree right. But to a degree incomplete. Listen, keep it up, but it's a hard work. You're doing hard work.
Kate Elise, thank you. This is wonderful. I appreciate it. Coming up, Growing Up Trump, this new generation speaking out. We have, as I told you, a panel of pretty remarkable young people from across the political spectrum with their thoughts on the first 100 days under Trump. I'm Ari Melber here in New York, and we have some developing stories this hour, including more on Russia. A new poll showing over half of Americans now say they do want an independent inquiry of those links between Trump and Russia. More than 60% say this is concerning for what it actually means for our democracy. Couple that with the former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn offering congressional testimony in exchange for immunity. He resigned February 13th, so that didn't take long. And now, today, Vladimir Putin's spokesman claiming there's actually nothing to uncover.
Are you concerned about anything he might say about his contacts with Russia?
No, we're not. We insist that any blamings that Russia could have been interfering in domestic affairs of the United States is slander.
Peskov also saying that an allegation regarding the Russian government's involvement in the recent killing of an opposition lawmaker is absurd. We'll have more on that momentarily. How will these events affect the already rocky path ahead for the Trump administration? Joining me now is Ron Klain, a former senior aide to President Clinton, former chief of staff to Vice President Biden, Matt Miller, who worked at the Department of Justice for Eric Holder, and back with us, Maya Wiley, Vice President for Social Justice at the New School and former counsel to Mayor de Blasio. So all of you have a lot of experience in government and also how scandals can grow and mutate. But, Ron, this is no normal scandal. What do you make of the most recent thing with Russia basically putting its people out brazenly on American television, which is their right, even as all of these allegations pile up and we see these reports of Russian lawmakers assassinated and targeted, Russian lawyer thrown off the building, not the time you'd expect them to be on a PR tour?
Well, but, you know, as you alluded to in an earlier segment, Ari, you know, the Russians are engaged in active measures to try to corrupt our democracy, to try to break apart our democracy in this country and other Western democracies around the world. And so the fact that their spokespeople are out there advancing that message, advancing propaganda, should be no surprise to people. Of the many sad things, and there are many sad things in the first 70 days of the Trump administration, I don't think there's anything sadder than seeing our government, our great democracy, aligning itself with these horrible forces of intolerance, of anti-liberalism. They're trying to destroy democracies around the world. And that is exactly what's happening here, Ari.
Right. And then you go to how this all works in government, Matt. Substantively, procedurally, rhetorically, the Trump White House has done everything it could to make it look like it's defending Russia during all this. At no point has there been sort of a pause and well, we welcome the facts that come or we're cooperating. Quite the opposite. I'm not going to list the litany, Matt, but take a listen to John McCain, no liberal critic, explaining why all of this piles up to needing independent committee.
This is why we need a select committee, Martha. Every time we turn around, another shoe drops from this centipede.
Matt?
Yeah, I mean, Senator McCain is right. I mean, the Trump's embrace of Russia obviously goes back to before he was president. It goes back to the campaign. And what's surprising politically a little bit is that he hasn't recognized, you would think that if you're in the middle of this kind of scandal where you are under investigation for potentially coordinating with Russian intelligence to try to steer the election to you when there are all of his famous comments during the campaign, you'd think they'd take a politically smart path now to, all they'd have to do is have the president come out and say one tough thing about Vladimir Putin, and it would go a long ways for them politically, and they're not willing to do that. I think it has something to do with Trump and who he is. He likes being flattered. He likes the way that Vladimir Putin has said nice things about him. And I think it has something to do with he doesn't want to admit that his campaign did get that help from Russia, because he knows that leads to real questions about his legitimacy that he's very, very sensitive to.
Yeah, I think this is an important part of what Trump has to do right now, is he has to say that actually I am the president of the United States and of all Americans, and I am going to come forward, I'm going to come clean, I'm going to cooperate. Instead, he sends tweets that suggest that somehow this is a witch hunt against his administration. And we have to remember that both his Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, whose office apparently helped introduce his campaign to Carter Page, his former campaign manager, Manafort. I mean, he's got so many connections right now to folks who are actually talking to a Russian ambassador to the United States, and even allegations in a dossier that there were actually conversations between Carter Page that was supposed to pass on the news to Trump that he was going to, in fact, get rewarded if sanctions against Russia were lifted, which is essentially what Michael Flynn came to hand-delivered to President Trump a week before he was forced to resign. I mean, these facts look very bad, and Trump has to confront them head on, and I actually don't think he can, quite frankly, at this point.
Right, and the foreign policy implications of that are profound. Ron, again, just to give folks who don't follow all of this on the year by year, the context, here's the Committee to Protect Journalists, nonpartisan, independent. This is the number of journalists killed in Russia here all the way back from '92 in this era. So there's nothing new, of course, about the targeting. That's why it's not obviously a democracy. It's an authoritarian society. And then you look at, say, that very simple piece of public knowledge, Ron, and again, I'm going to cite a Republican. This is not necessarily a partisan issue. Marco Rubio pressing Rex Tillerson on those public facts and what they mean about this government. He has his own ties to Russia and was incoming Secretary of State. Take a listen, Ron.
Mr. Tillerson, do you believe that Vladimir Putin and his cronies are responsible for ordering the murder of countless dissidents, journalists, and political opponents?
I do not have sufficient information to make that claim, but I am not willing to make conclusions on what is only publicly available or have been publicly reported.
None of this is classified, Mr. Tillerson. These people are dead.
Ron, what do you make of that exchange now, 2 months later, with what we know?
Well, the Senate should never have confirmed Rex Tillerson, and it's sad that Marco Rubio voted to confirm Rex Tillerson after giving those answers. But look, this goes back to what Maya said before. It's all the people around Trump who have these ties to Russia. Mr. Tillerson made a lot of money doing business in Russia. Senator Sessions, former Senator Sessions, now our Attorney General, has ties, and his team has ties to Russia. And when you put it all together, it lays right at the president's doorstep. And in fact, when it has been laid at the president's doorstep, his answers have been very disappointing. He was asked about these kinds of the crimes that Russia's committed, killing journalists, and instead of deploring it, instead of condemning it, what he said is, oh, our country's not so innocent either. And that idea that we're going to lower our human rights standards, lower our civil rights standards, lower our civil liberties standards down to the Russian level as a way of getting along with Russia is a deplorable concept. And that's what the President of the United States has said to defend his friends and allies in Russia.
And that, I mean, there's so much more there. We covered this last hour, and there's so much. The other thing I want to get to, because it's brand new and hasn't been on TV yet, Maya, is one of the things we were debating is whether this outreach on Obamacare from President Trump is going to work at all. We have new sound here of Rand Paul, a big critic. He was a roadblock. Maybe striking a balance, maybe Donald Trump finding in personal diplomacy what he couldn't find on the House floor last week. Here is brand new Rand Paul after golfing with Trump.
We had a great day with the president today. We did talk about some health care reform. I think the sides are getting closer together, and I remain very optimistic that we will get Obamacare repeal. Thanks.
Maya?
Hard to believe.
You don't buy it?
I don't buy it. I buy that there are conversations happening, and I buy that the Republicans feel a lot of heat to get a win on something that they crashed and burned so dramatically on. But unless you have a plan that's going to address the fact that their previous plan was going to literally take tax credits from those earning $200,000 or less a year and essentially give a give back of $7 million a year to the top 400 earning Americans in the country and leave 24 million Americans without health insurance, I think that that's a tall order.
Right, and the numbers don't lie. What did you think also of Rand Paul's sunglasses?
I thought they were quite interesting and not going to get him over the edge when it comes to support for this
gentle.
bill.
You're not throwing any shade over there.
You know, I have a lot of shade to throw, but Rand Paul's not worth my shade.
The control room saying need to wrap. I don't know. Sometimes they say need to wrap, but I was interested in your take on that. Maya Wiley, a good sport as always, and very knowledgeable lawyer. Matt Miller over from DOJ land. Ron Klain. Thank you all for your expertise. And tonight on The Point, we have something that we are trying to do a little differently. Millions of young people did mobilize in 2016, not only for Hillary Clinton, as some think, but many for President Trump. Now we're going to hear directly from them about what they think. And as always, we have Ari's inbox, but first, stay with us. The Point, growing up Trump, right up after the break. And
leaders, that's our pride.